All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back here to Kicking It With Knuble, episode 12. Mike, we got another guest here coming back from Thanksgiving. Long time man in the organization, played a lot of different roles, played on the team, coached the team, general manager of the team, a Flyer for life, Paul HOLMGREN. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time out of your day to talk with us today.
Well, my pleasure. It's great to see you guys. Always like talking about the Flyers, especially with a guy like Mike. So it's like I said to you guys earlier, as soon as I saw Mike's name attached to this, I was more than willing to jump on. He's great when he was with the Flyers, and a true warrior at heart and a true Flyer.
Well, thank you, Paul. And when Chris was giving you the intro there, it was like, yeah, you've basically done everything in this organization, and from being a player all the way to the top of running the organization. Just struck me, like in what you've done for this organization, how long you've been around. It's pretty amazing to be in one spot for so long.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. Obviously, just from the first time I came to the Flyers, I was blessed to be able to play on a team with all those guys that won the Stanley Cups. I came right after, actually March of '76 is when I signed with the Flyers after the WHA team I was with folded. I was able to play a game that year, and then I injured my eye, but the next year in training camp, I was able to make the team out of training camp. And just to be thrown into that group of players that had achieved that, and their work ethic and their camaraderie, their discipline, just all the things that a young hockey player needed to see and be a part of, really helped me in my career as a player. And I think the fact that I was part of that helped me in other areas of my work in the hockey business as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was looking through your stats. How come you did one season in Minnesota, with the Golden Gophers in college, and then switched? You went right to pro. What was kind of the genesis of that, or just wasn't the college game wasn't there for you, or just?
No, not at all. I mean, I played for Herb Brooks at the University of Minnesota. We lost in the championship game that year, and I was drafted in the WHA. That summer I was drafted by the Flyers, and just an opportunity came up. I went to Herb, and it was one of those, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out, but in a good way. He said, you got to take this. And, it was just an opportunity. That was a different time, Mike, because, not only was the NHL thriving, but there's this new league, the WHA, was coming into its own, and they were getting a number of players from the NHL to come and play in the WHA. So, when I went to the WHA, I got to play with, like, Davey Keon was on that team, Johnny McKenzie, Teddy Hampson, Mike Walton, Rick Smith, John Arbor, a lot of great hockey players in their heyday that were, sort of winding down their careers, obviously, but I mean, I learned some great lessons playing with those guys, and I was only 19 years old, and getting to play with those guys, and especially in critical junctures, like when the team started to go through the process of folding, where we literally had a vote in the locker room, whether we should play for 1 month without pay to give the owner a chance to.
That's crazy.
Get his finances in order. And I'm sitting there, I'd left college, so I gave up any opportunity to go back and play hockey on a scholarship. I thought, well, maybe I'll just go back and I'll play baseball. So I had no idea what happened in my hockey career after that. But I put my hand up like everybody else, and I don't think we lasted a month. The team sort of broke up, and a lot of guys ended up on other WHA teams. I had an opportunity to go to a couple other WHA teams, and a guy that was kind of representing at the time, his name was George Lyon. He said, "You know what? The Flyers drafted you. They just won a couple of Stanley Cups. So it's a more you know, the league is more secure, more stable. Why don't we take a look at going there? And that's ended up where we ended up. I flew into Philly and met with Keith Allen, who was a GM at the time, and signed that day. He said, "I'll see you at training camp." And I said, "Is there any chance I can play? Like, is your minor league team?" So, sure, yeah. So I ended up going to Richmond and playing a few games there. And then because the Flyers were so decimated with injuries, I got called up and played a game. And as I mentioned earlier, I had an eye injury. So I would have been able to play in the playoffs that year because the Flyers were so banged up. But because of my eye injury, I couldn't. So, funny how it goes, but I played with 4 teams that year in 4 different leagues. Started in Johnstown. When I got called up, I played for the Fighting Saints. That team folded. Went to Richmond, played like 8 games for the Richmond Robins in the Old American League. Got called up, and my last game was with the Flyers, and that's when I had suffered an eye injury that cost me the rest of that year.
Yeah, it's crazy. The funding, you know, the WHA and teams. I mean, literally, players. I mean, it's testament how far everything's come. But yeah, back in the WHA days, guys are showing up, not getting paid, and wondering if the doors are literally going to be locked when you came in that morning. So that's an amazing story how you end up getting to Philly. I mean, even though you're a draft pick, but the roundabout way you got there, and
Right.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah. No, for sure. And like, especially too, because the other day, Bruce Boudreau was on Spittin' Chicklets, and he was talking about that. You know, he's basically saying like it was just crazy playing for Minnesota and like the stories and all that too, from the WHA. Like, I'm curious, like for you, Paul, like what was kind of the biggest moment, like from going from the WHA to the NHL? Like, you know, how drastic was the you know, difference in the leagues and things like that?
You know, you mentioned Bruce Boudreau. He's my old roommate from Johnstown. Him and I and Dave Hansen lived in the same house for a month or so before I got called up.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know, I don't have any bad memories of the WHA. I mean, the team, everything seemed to be for a 19-year-old kid that had never played pro hockey before. Everything seemed fine to me until we had that meeting that day.
Well, it wasn't.
And then when I went to the Flyers, obviously,
Yeah, right.
The team, at that time, I think there was only 20 teams or maybe 21 teams in the league. I forget. But obviously the stability was a big thing. And, you know, you're walking into the locker room, and then there's, you know, guys you saw. I mean, I remember watching the Flyers beat the Russians that year before I was still with the Fighting Saints when they beat the Russians in that game where the Russians left the ice. So, but I don't have anything bad to say about the WHA. I think they tried to do something different, and, you know, 4 teams ended up merging into the NHL, which made it you know, there's still. So it was. Hockey is hockey, right? You know, you go to a team and you play and you do the best you can, and then you get ready to play the next game. Kind of the way I look at it.
Well, speaking of Philly, like, how was the locker room? You know, like, it's, you know, you're 19, 20, you said. That's a pretty tough group to get in, right? They'd won. They're kind of, you know, they're pretty tight as a group. Probably it's really hard to get in. You know, like, they're probably pretty loyal to each other, let alone some young kid coming up.
You know what? They're great, and right from the start, you know, it was different, maybe a little bit different for me because I talked about the eye injury that I had, but, you know, I played a game. We played against the Rangers on a Thursday night. The next day we practiced and we flew to Boston, and every night before a road game, particularly an afternoon game, Fred Sherrill was the coach. He would have a meeting in his room at 10 o'clock. I didn't know we didn't really discuss anything all those years, but I look back, I think he was just making sure guys were in.
So he was accounted
at 10 o'clock. So,
Guys can go
But
back out
I remember Bob Clark and Barry Ashby came up to me, and at this point in time, my right eye was, I could barely keep it open. It was weeping. So they ended up and Barry Ashby lost his eye the year before in the playoffs. I don't know if you remember that against the Rangers. He lost an eye. So he says, there's something wrong with you. So him and Clark, he took me to the hospital, and they ended up doing emergency surgery on my eye. So I was, I found out how great the organization was. I mean, they flew my parents in from Minnesota to be there when I got out of the surgery. They looked after them I had to spend a couple of days in the hospital. They took care of my parents and got me back on track there. And, I just played one game there. And then the next year in training camp, I get to know a little bit more about the team, but they're very welcoming to me. Good group of guys. I remember Clarky taking me to a clothing store and getting me situated, buying some new clothing and stuff like that. Very, very welcoming. It was an easy group to break in with, but like I mentioned earlier about the work ethic and stuff. Like the work ethic was something that I'd never seen before. I mean, I played for Herb Brooks, and we had to do the famous Herbies up and down the ice for like 30 minutes. But this team just worked and worked and worked, and they were so together as a team. It was clear to see why they had won a couple championships because of how close they were as a group.
Yeah,
it really was.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's funny because I feel like I think when you kind of look at the team now and kind of where they are, obviously it's a rebuild, and they've kind of come out and said that. But I think one of the big things that the Flyers have right now as a group is that they're so tight. I mean, you see it all the time on social media and things like that, is like how tight of a group it is. And I'm just curious, on top of that, how important is that, like, through a season? And obviously, when and it's I guess it's similar a little bit, playing for Herb Brooks. The Flyers have Torts a little bit. It's kind of a little different, kind of a harder style coach. How important is that when having, such a tight room, when, things could go wrong and things like that, especially for the Flyers now, where, they're in a rebuild and they're not essentially really supposed to be good, obviously. So, just kind of talk to, how important that is in having such a tight room like that.
Yeah, Mike can attest to this too. It's funny. Teams come together in a lot of ways, and sometimes they fall apart in a lot of ways, right? And you can see it might be just one little thing that puts you behind the 8 ball or ahead of the curve. And I think the Flyers right now, and even last year, I thought you could see that their unity and their togetherness and their willingness to work hard and sacrifice for each other kind of came through. And that's why I think they, toward the end of the year, they were still on the hunt. And then who knows what happened? Some injuries maybe occurred at the wrong time, or perhaps they just weren't ready. And I think that's probably the real reason. But this year I see, they started out not so good. Then they had some injuries. The goaltending wasn't great. They weren't playing great defensively. And I don't know what's changed over the last little while here, but they've, since Sam Erson's been out, the other 2 goalies now all of a sudden picked up their game. Looked like the big guy, Fedotov, it looked like he wasn't going to play again. And then all of a sudden he has a good game and he wins in Tampa. And then the other guy, he didn't look so good either for a while. Now he looks like he's unbeatable. So it's amazing how things can turn. And now they're starting to get healthy again. They're starting to get some of these defensemen back. Like York came back the other day, and it sounds like Drysdale's getting close to being ready. Erson's skating again. So all the things are coming up in a right way again. And you just never know. But I think, when you're in a locker room, and Mike can attest to this as well, you the teams that get along and hang together and do things together, work hard and practice together. Talent obviously goes a long way too, but you can find the most talented team in the league. If they don't get along, they're probably not going to win.
Yeah, you need the certain like characters and personalities to help keep things going in the right direction, and and the younger players feed off the leaders, and if the leaders are woe is me and they're dragging their bottom lip all over the place, and they're either mad about how it's going for them personally that season, or the team results, or they have a contract situation coming up and they're worried about that. It's who can hold it together and power through, and it's like, by the end, sometimes the best teams on paper don't always win. It's kind of the ones who can hold it together and keep things on track, right? And keep people on board. And you got to have luck with injuries and all that too, but avoiding that stuff, and good play from your stars. But it's just a lot of it's keeping everybody on track and all that. So, but for like on the mat, so when you're managing, when you see a team on the management side, would you let teams like figure it out on their own? Would you have conversation with the coaches? Would you watch from above? Would you try and influence or anything, or would you just kind of watch from above? And that's just a management style, and maybe address the team at some point, which I remember a couple of times, and Chris and I have talked about before, once or twice you addressed the team and we knew that was not good, and when Paul had to come down and talk and he wanted to say something, it was not a good situation. But what was your style, and did you let teams figure it out, or when would you felt like it was time for you to step in or anything like that?
Yeah, well, a little bit of all those things, Mike. I mean, depending on the coach, like I worked with Johnny Stevens. He was very quiet. I remember whenever I wanted to go into the room and talk to the players as a manager, I always made sure I asked the coach before, "Are you okay with this? I got to get something off my chest." And and of course, what coach is going to say no? Right? Like really, when you think about it, right? The GM, that's your boss. You probably got.
You can say whatever you need to say.
So, but I wanted to make sure that he was okay with it. And then, with Peter 𝐊𝐈𝐓 was a lot different than John. He played for both those guys, and one was kind of reserved. The other guy was more upbeat, more outspoken, more I don't know what the word is.
Energetic, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Charismatic. I don't know if that's the right.
Oh yeah. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of times when I was the GM, or not a lot, a few times, it just came to there was a tipping point for me, which made me go down in the room and do what I did. But a lot of times I would, you talk to certain players, you talk to your leaders, your star player, whoever it may be, or a group of your players that are what the coach and what the management team considers a leadership group. So you kind of get a handle on what's going on, and then I think the situation kind of resolves itself. Everybody kind of comes to a realization that, hey, we got to get our crap together here, right? And
yeah,
I think a lot of times, if when you get together as a group like that, or a smaller group, things kind of come to light, and you can kind of see the forest through the trees, so to speak. But there was a few times where I did go down to the room, and I remember saying to a coworker after I did that, he'd say to me, "Well, how do you think that went?" I said, "I don't know, but I feel better about it." At least I got some things off my chest. So, yeah. You never know. I remember going down to the room one time. We were losing 5-1 after the second period to what I thought was not a very good team. And all I did was walk down the hallway. A couple guys saw me, I'm sure, saw that I was probably not very happy. And we ended up winning the game 6-5. Like I didn't say a word. So, and I don't mean to take any credit, but
Right.
players realize that, hey, we got to get we got to get it together here, right? We're not playing the way we should be playing. We still got 20 minutes to figure it out. Let's and it's just one of those games, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, well, you certainly had a presence, and whether I noticed as a GM, you had a really good a real intimidating look and a real presence, right? And you talk about walking down the hallway, and then you alluded to earlier, kind of being part of a leadership group. Maybe it was where I was in my career, or I came in as you guys signed me as an unrestricted free agent. Maybe I was a certain age, and combined with kind of how I was performing, I ended up on the leader side of the table there and dealing with you. And that was kind of like my first time. And I've talked to people about that. People ask, about different people and different stops along a career. And I said, it's funny. Paul was a very engaging manager. I felt like I had a nice relationship with him. And it might have been my age and kind of where I was in my career, and the fact that, he brought me in and I was playing pretty well. So, I became part of that, and I really enjoyed. It was the first time in my career where a GM gave a shit about what I thought about anything, and so it was kind of refreshing. I'm like, I don't know if I deserve this or not, but we have a nice rapport like that. So I and throughout my time there, I always felt like, seeing in the hallway or whatever was, I get a handshake or a hi, a quick talk or whatever. And it was always a cordial relationship. And it might've been my age, it might've been, how things are going for me and stuff, but that was, something I always remember is kind of crossing over and having a decent relationship with the GM on a personal basis, enough, stopping in, getting called in the office, but it wasn't necessarily always a bad thing, right? Usually in hockey, you get called in the office, it's not good. But, Paul would call in and just kind of sit and chat a little bit. You talk about the status of the team. What do you think about this, and that? And whether you did anything about it or not, or took it with you, or, whatever. It's just kind of us chit-chatting. Maybe you getting a pulse of things. But, I always enjoyed that back and forth. But I can see how you walk in the hallway at a tough game might spark a fire a little bit.
I remember that vividly. I mean, we were playing. You might have still been here. I don't recall, but we were losing to Columbus, and Columbus wasn't great at that time, and our goalie wasn't playing very good. But to be down 5-1, and look, I walked down the hallway. I know a couple of guys saw me, and I wanted to go in there. I wanted to go in the locker room and say something. I didn't do it, but maybe I came to my better senses. I don't know, but. No, Mike, you were always when you came to the Flyers, you were at that status as a player where you deserved the respect of your teammate. You earned the respect of your teammates and everybody else in the organization based on what you did. And when you came in, you went about your business and did your work, and that's why you elevated yourself to the leadership group on our team, for sure. And I respected your opinion of the game. I respected your opinion of the team and you had a unique look at what was going on. And that's all credit to you.
No, thanks. Yeah. I enjoyed the back and forth. It was good.
No, 100% too. Yeah. No, and I feel like too, especially that was an era for the Flyers where there was a huge change. Mike, we talked about this before. Mr. Holmgren, for you, obviously that 06-07 season that, before a couple years ago, that was, the worst Flyer season of all time. It was just bad. From February of 2007 to February of 2008, in either a trade or free agency, you acquired Braden Coburn, Scotty Upshall, Marty Biron, Danny Briere, Scott Hartnell, Kimmo Timonen, Jason Smith, who was the captain that season, Joffrey Lupul, and then Vaclav Prospal. Is there any way like when you go back and you think about your time as GM and things like that, what was so pressing about that season and how many changes you made? And right there, that's 7-8 guys, and a lot of them were longtime Flyers after that, and guys who played in Philly and were huge impact guys too. And obviously Mike was a couple years before that. Mike, obviously I know the lockout and everything kind of affected, when you signed and things like that too. But Mr. Holmgren, like for that season and just like those changes, what was, the biggest thing in your mind that you thought you had to fix?
Well, Mike remembers this pretty well too. I mean, if you look at our team in 06, 07, there was a lot of stuff that went wrong, but we weren't that bad. Our personnel wasn't that bad. We had a lot of young guys that were kind of up and coming. We're maybe at the ready to play to the level that they needed to play at yet. But we did have some good young players. But Clarkey stepped down early that year. We had to fire Hitchcock early that year. A young coach comes in. A new GM kind of takes over as an interim GM, and so there's a lot of stuff going on. I look back on that and I think, well, we did have young players in place. We did have some good older players too. Mike being one of them. Simone Gagne, Peter Forsberg was still there. So we had that as he was an asset still at that point, and we tried to talk him into staying. But we ended up trading him and getting a pretty decent return. And the biggest thing we had was probably cap space, which allowed us the freedom to do a lot of those things, whether it be the signing of Danny Briere or some of the free agent or some of the trades that we were able to make too. And we basically acquired the rights to Chemo and Scotty Hartnell, but you still had to have the cap space to sign those guys, which was nice. So, a lot of things. It was kind of like a lot of good things came into play at the right time for the Flyers. But I do think the base of what we had before that was good, and I think we would have been. I mean, I don't know if we would have made the strides we made if we didn't add a lot of those players, but I think we would have been a better team regardless the next year, just because those young guys would have been Carter, Richards, Umberger. Those guys would have been, a year older and a year better.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it was kind of, I think back like that 06-07, like Hatch started having knee problems and, Mike Ratchie, those were a couple of your signings, and everybody's kind of transitioning to like what the new NHL was, and they thought it was, it was kind of the teams had to adjust and figure out what you were. And I thought missing Hatch and Ratchie had like a chronic, whatever, it was like a sciatic nerve or something, but, missing those guys was huge. And I thought in that 06 year. And, but, like you say, you laid the groundwork in the next year, and those guys, ends up paying off going to the finals a couple years later. And those guys were, the young guys were coming in and they deserved their chance, and they were good players, and they were up and coming, like you said, and they were getting better as time wore on. They were getting better every year. And and those were bold moves, to get Chemo and Scotty, and end up being huge moves for the organization. And then, getting Danny, it was Danny and who was at Gomez and Drury that year. And it's kind of those guys filtered out and, with Danny and, that's changes. Those are like generational players, they change the direction of your franchise. And still are influence on a franchise. So it's, obviously with Danny's position. So certainly a franchise altering era in there, or a couple of years when you brought those guys in, for sure.
Yeah. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, for sure. And, obviously now there's been a lot of talk of trade rumors and things like that with the Flyers. And, it seems like one of them things where, obviously people kind of talk about rumors and things like that. And, they usually say that teams are kind of willing like to make a deal early in the season, but really like only if you get more value than what you think. For you, as someone who was GM, is that something that you would, just kind of agree with and kind of like attest to in terms of like, is it maybe like too early in the season that teams can maybe get more of a value back for certain guys and things like that? Or is that kind of why trades don't really happen until maybe later in the year and, towards the deadline and things like that? And just in your opinion?
Well, I wasn't very patient as a GM. I didn't like. I don't know. I look back now, and there's a lot of, not. It's a different game today. I think you need to, like, and just in Danny's situation right now, like he's, his plan is to build this in his vision. He's taken the right, in my opinion, he's taken good steps so far. He's picked up a lot of pieces. He's got a lot of draft picks, future draft picks coming up. He's utilized a lot of picks in the last couple of years to look like 𝐊𝐍𝐔𝐁𝐋𝐄 looks like a good player. He's certainly, there's going to be some growing pains with him, but he's certainly doing some pretty cool things right now, and for the team. So I think this team is situated where right now it's kind of on the uptick, and they're building for a winning a team that can compete for multiple championships. Is the way I look at it. Like I think I learned from Clarkie, and probably from Ed Snyder a little bit too. They both those guys wanted to win and win now. And I'm not saying that Danny and the Flyers don't want to win now. They do, but they're willing to build it in a way that was different than maybe the way Clarkie built the team and the way that I envisioned building the team. Like I felt like, and Clarkie was a manager 1 year in a salary cap era, and then the next year he stepped down. And now I take over, and it's the second year of the salary cap year, and it's just a different time now, and things have evolved, and teams have figured it out. They got to be patient. They got to do this. They got to do that. There's a lot more involved with being a GM now in this. What are we? 10 years into the salary cap, Mike? Maybe.
Yeah. 20.
20. Okay. Okay. So it's. Things have evolved now where you can't just do things, like you could back then. Like you just can't. Well, there's too many pitfalls and too many landmines that could really disrupt and maybe ruin your franchise for years. So
that's a good point.
Yeah. And like same with so coming up, I came up with Detroit and Rangers, and then. Boston's a little bit different animal, but I'd throw the Flyers in with like the Torontos, the Detroits, the Rangers, where, when Mr. Snyder wanted something, it got done. And it was before that cap era. I mean, you could stockpile players, right? When I broke in Detroit, there's probably 8 or 9 Hall of Famers, and you could add pieces quickly and win now. Like if you felt there was a window there, you could really go out and find the pieces and throw some money around and get guys there quick. And now, like to your point, it's just, it's much more of a foundation you have to lay, and you've got to let the foundation grow and let it move, and then add to it when you can. But at the end of the day, you've got to tie your wagon to some young players and kind of ride up with them, and you could say the Carter Richards kind of era was kind of like that at the beginning of it, but now it's the Konecny and Sanheim group, and it's that core group, and it's a younger group that you've got to ride up, right? And then you cycle up. Cycle back down again, and you try and find another group to ride up, and so, and part of it, being bad at the right times and getting the right draft picks. If you can get a generational player in the draft, and bad for a couple of years, and look what Chicago did, what Pittsburgh did, what Washington did. They picked up generational guys in the draft, and it's harder to do it. A little bit of luck, but like you got to grow that foundation. It just takes it takes time. You can't do it now. You've got to let them grow. Sure, it's like cooking a turkey on Thanksgiving. You can't have the turkey in the first hour. You got to wait. You got to wait 5 or 6 hours, and
unless you deep fry it.
Years, you got.
Yeah. No, for sure. And
anyway, I think the Flyers are on the right track. Jonesy and Danny, I think they do have a good vision. It's important that they have the patience and the wherewithal to see that vision through, and I think they do. And I think Dan Hilferty, who's kind of like the Ed Snyder of today, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, I think he does too. And they recognize that the past is important while moving forward in the future. And I think whenever I go there now, the attitude seems great. Torts is, he's evolved as a coach. He's not as harsh as he used to be. I think he's a good teacher, and I think he's, some of these young guys today, they're probably looking at him like, what the hell? But he's a good teacher, and he does have, I think, way more patience than a lot of the media and maybe some other people give him credit for. I'm a big fan of John Tortorella's, and he's a good friend of mine, but I'm still a big fan of the way he coaches, and his passion for the game is second to none, and his passion for the Flyers right now is second to none. So I love what's going on there.
Yeah, these days, like you talk with the young players, you have to be a teacher, and like you have to have patience because they're not going anywhere, right? Back in the day, you're like, I'm sick of this guy. I'm going to do something. I can't watch this anymore. But these days they're staying around, and you got to work with them. And the coaches have to evolve too, right? So if they want to keep coaching, they've got to evolve their system, and they got to, and their way of thinking. And getting in that teaching mode a little bit more, and patience, right? You're going to have to keep showing them. Good thing is you have resources. It's easier. You don't have to cut tape like you did, physically cut the tape back in the day, right? But now, you can show them so much information. The kids have grown up on it, and they've learned that way. That's the way they've grown up on video and seeing things and quick snippets, and you try and give it to them, and, hopefully it sinks in, but, back to Torts, but, he's so, he's hard, but he's fair, and he's going to work with you. So you just got to be ready to take a hard look at yourself as a player. And if you got to dig into your player and look in the mirror and say, hey, this isn't what I'm not good at. I need to learn some things, and I need to figure this out. That's best for me. Smart ones figure it out because they that's going to give them a long career. But once you don't, you're going to have a short career. You can do it your way, but it's going to be, you're going to have a short career as a result unless you're going to listen.
Yeah. No, for sure. And just to kind of go back, Mr. Holmgren, like for you, obviously you were a really physical player, but you obviously had skill too. In some of the years you had like 100 something penalty minutes. You also had 20, 30 goals too, which is I think it kind of speaks to the era of the game and also kind of how you played. In terms of when coaching and then also kind of building a team as a GM. And obviously I think it kind of turns to kind of now, like, how important is it to kind of like let the skill guys make a play, you know what I mean, but also be able to kind of use the physicality and things like that, because obviously there isn't as much of it now in the league. But like for you, like how important was that, at least when playing, and then kind of coaching and GM and things like that too?
I'm not sure I really understand your question, Chris. When you talk about understanding there's different types of players, and as a coach, you have to allow certain players a little more flexibility in what they are trying to do with the puck. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So basically, I'm just trying to figure out, like, for you, like obviously you were very skilled, but also like physical too. Obviously that changed a lot. Like, how important was that, at least kind of, when building a team, just trying to kind of figure out, like, just letting guys with skill kind of use their skill, but also, the guys that were physical and things like that too. Just like how important, is that in building a team, especially when like eras change and things like that too.
Yeah, well, some of that comes from, players today have, Mike talked about it a little bit, and I'll go a little step further. Players today have, they still forget what their best asset is sometimes. But I do think between teammates, agents, coaches, managers, players should know what they're best at. And, right now the Flyers they got the young Russian kid here. He does some great things offensively, right? He was benched a couple games. He was benched during games for, maybe not doing things he needs to do a little bit away from the puck. he's certainly not benched because he's not producing offensively, right? So there's a fine line there that the coach needs to kind of work through with the kid, and the kid needs to understand I got to be better in this area or this area. And then, the other thing with him is they're dealing with the language barrier. He doesn't understand a lot of stuff, right? So it's a kind of a tug of war going on between Torts and the kid probably. I think the quicker he can learn the language, the quicker it'll turn around for him, or be a little better for him. But all coaches should realize that not every player is the same. I remember playing for Fred Shiro, and we get to the end of practice and we're lined up on the goal line. He said, "You're all different, but you're not the same," or something. Some kind of a comment like that, right? And he says, "Okay, Clark, Barber, Jimmy Watson, you guys leave the ice, and the rest of us have to skate, down and backs for 20 minutes." Well, so it was pretty easy to figure out who the stars were, right? Like, if you didn't know, there's your stars. They went to the shower and didn't have to do this other stuff. I can remember Wayne Simmons. Mike, you played a little bit with Wayne, right?
Yep.
So Wayne was a real hard-nosed player. Had good skill too, but I remember talking to him one time, and different time and different. And I asked him if he knew who Meadowlark Lemon was. And he says, "Yeah, I know who he is." I said, "Well, you need to stop playing like Meadowlark Lemon." And, my point was, you're not a fancy player, right? You're not a stick handle behind the back, dribble the ball behind the back through the legs type of player. You gotta go to the front of the net and get in the corners and muck it up and do, and, I remember calling his agent after that because I didn't want it to become an issue. And he said, no, I get it. The agent. And it was kind of funny. I didn't know what I was going to say if he didn't know who Meadowlark Lemon was, but I would have been stuck. But anyway, hey, it took me a long time to figure out what kind of player I was. But I knew at the end of the day, like I played with Kenny Linsman one year, and I said, I knew right away, if I go to the front of the net with my stick on the ice, I'm probably going to score a goal once in a while. And I did. So you figure it out. Sometimes the hard way, sometimes the easy way.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, you talk about coaching guys, you probably say that one thing to Wayne, and then all of a sudden, like next game you see response, like he's back to normal. Like the elevator went to the top floor, right? And then other guys will be like, I don't know what he's saying by, I don't know what he's saying by telling me this, and it turns into a big deal. And now 5 games later, he's still getting the same kind of, he's still not getting it, but
that coach is an idiot or whatever, right?
Yeah. I don't know. It goes, they're like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And then, some players are like, yeah, no, I know what he's saying. I got it. Next game, you see an instant change, and so those guys seem to do pretty well. But, it's interesting you talk about, that you figured some stuff out. And I like to say I figured some stuff out as long as I went. And not everything can be spoon-fed to you as a player. You've got to have some hockey common sense. Yeah. And you got to be able to see the big picture and look at yourself. I think athletes, that's the hardest part and the most humbling is when you really start to look at yourself as a player and try and address your weaknesses and what I'm not getting and what am I not doing well and what am I missing here. And I think that's a huge part as an athlete, that self-evaluation and, hey, like this coach is trying to tell me something. I really got to be open to this and I got to figure this out, and you talked about, playing with Kenny Linsman, you figure I'm going to the net with my stick on the ice. Well, nobody drew that up for you. You just figure it out. You're like, how am I going to figure this out? And so I think that can get lost a little bit. And everybody feels like they need to be told what to do and how it's going to go and tell me everything I need to know. Well, you got to it's pro sports. You got to figure some stuff out on your own. Yeah. And I think that gets lost a little bit these days in athletes, but
today they seem to need, like the players today seem to, they ask why a lot. Like, why do you want me to do that? Well, why? We'll do this. Well, why? Yeah. So it's a little more involved. I think there's a lot between the analytics of the game and the video and the stuff they can, and the iPads on the bench that they can watch their last shift, just like it's really, I mean, it makes my head spin how much is going on now in the game. And I'm not, I still love the game, but it's, man, oh man, it's passed me by for sure. I know that.
No, for sure. This has been great. Mike, that's all I have. I don't know if you have anything else. But yeah, no, it's been great. Mr. Holmgren, thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Mike, good to see you guys.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for coming out.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you guys too. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Homer.